Larry Sanger is a philosopher who was in on the ground floor of Wikipedia. He got his PhD in analytic philosophy from Ohio State University, where he also taught philosophy, but he set the world alight a couple of weeks ago by coming out as a Christian. Here's my conversation about why an agnostic philosopher in his 50s would pick up the Bible and start to become a Christian. I'm Glenn from Speak Life. We like to see all things through the lens of Jesus. If you like this kind of content, please do subscribe to the channel. Here's my conversation with Larry Sanger. Larry Sanger, co-founder of Wikipedia. It's so great to have you on the channel. You wrote an article around about 2 weeks ago explaining your journey to faith. Was it a surprise to you that you became a Christian?
Well, yes, it was. It was a surprise to me how much that I became a Christian, and the response that I have had in the last couple of weeks. I really almost couldn't believe it. To be perfectly honest, I can even show you a message that I wrote to a friend of mine saying, "Now nobody's really going to care." I was wrong.
You were wrong, because you kicked off that very long article with a quotation from the old King James version of Mark's Gospel: "Go into all nations and preach the gospel." And it seems like you've done just that with this article. Tell me about some of those reactions that you've been getting to the article. From where have people been interested?
Oh, there's been a lot. For one thing, a lot of people noticed, and I think really fixated, understandably so, on one of the last sections of the essay, which is about my failure to start going to church. I admitted it. I know that I should, but I have reasons that are fairly idiosyncratic to me. But a lot of people responded basically plugging for their own denomination. So,
right.
You know, the Presbyterians thought I was a Presbyterian. The Anglicans thought I was an Anglican. A number of Catholics thought I was a Catholic, and so forth.
Yeah. Fresh meat. Yes, people trying to get their hooks into Larry. Now, I asked you to begin with that. Was it a surprise to you that you became a Christian? And I guess a lot of your background has been very, very much in the area of academia, and not only your history with Wikipedia, but you've been an analytic philosopher and you've taught philosophy at university and that kind of thing. You talk in your article about kind of methodological skepticism.
Yes.
Can you talk to us about what that is, for if that's the first time somebody has heard that kind of that phrase? What did it mean to you, and
Sure.
How did that impact the way you were hearing faith claims? Because you grew up in a sort of a Lutheran Christian sort of church background, but nevertheless, methodological skepticism was there as the filter through which you were perceiving the world. What impact did that have?
It's an approach that I took to truth-seeking, is how I would describe it. And it isn't my term. I was told that it is the correct term. Ordinary skepticism, the best place to begin is with that. Ordinary skepticism simply says you cannot know that there is for example, an external world. In other words, there's some domain of knowledge, and a skeptic says you can't know stuff about that. All right. Methodological skepticism doesn't actually make claims about what is possible to know. It simply recommends the stance of not taking a stand on things that are insufficiently supported, and with the view of, at some later date, coming to a firmer belief, to true knowledge in the long run. So it is a something I would say that a lot of people with a sort of scientific outlook, at least classically, have had. Not all of them. Some of the advocates of scientism will simply endorse whatever mainstream science says. Whereas methodological skepticism says, well, we're not going to endorse anything at all until we have really, really, really good reasons to believe it, essentially.
We had on our channel last week a philosopher called Philip Goff, and in the area of consciousness, he's really made quite a popular stand now for panpsychism. And so that's really where he's kind of made his name. But he was an agnostic philosopher very much. He wrote a great book called Galileo's Error, talking about the scientific method as a method of exploring the world via this methodological skepticism inherited from Descartes. And that's a very good way of explaining physical aspects of the physical world, but hits the buffers hard when it comes to issues like consciousness, issues like the mind-body problem and that sort of thing. There are lots of questions that it leaves unanswered, and certainly for Philip Goff, he recognized that method of doubt was not going to get him very far with some of the biggest questions, like questions about consciousness and mind. Is that something that you found similarly?
Essentially, if you want to arrive at any firm conclusions, not to say logically or methodologically established conclusions, but just ones that you're willing to take firmly, you have to be willing to countenance a little bit of speculation. Let's put it that way. And I think also that it's pretty important, and this was important when I was studying the Bible, that I essentially bracket my doubts. In other words, like, I don't take this stuff terribly seriously. I'm just trying to understand what the Christians think. First of all, what the ancient Hebrews thought when they were writing the original or hearing the original words of the Old Testament, but also what modern Christians, or later Christians anyway, thought about what they meant. And I was just trying to understand that. And there's a certain approach to skepticism which basically says, well, if I'm not seeing any evidence right away, if I'm not really grokking anything that seems to be at all important, then I'm just going to turn off and turn away from the discussion. So I had separate reasons, I suppose you could say, to want to stick it out with my reading, with my study of the Bible. And it was the result of doing that, and simply trying to acquaint myself with the thought world of Christianity, or the biblical thought world. That really changed my my outlook on everything, ultimately.
Yes. I'd love to get there. Let's think about that in a second, about the way in which entering into the strange new world of the Bible changed things for you. But yep. I guess you were kind of teaching philosophy in an age when the new atheists were all the rage. This publishing phenomenon was rampant all across the Anglosphere. The God delusion, God is not great, all that kind of stuff. You, as a kind of an agnostic, did you align yourself in any way with that tribe, or how was that striking you at the time?
It's like I wanted them to make good points. I wanted them to be persuasive, to use the best arguments, because like I was familiar with them myself, because they're ultimately philosophical arguments. But I ultimately was very disappointed. At least the new atheists, as they're called, were mostly not philosophers at all. Daniel Dennett was the great exception, because he was well known and highly respected in philosophy before he became known as a skeptic. Sort of like in his later years, he became almost like a professional skeptic. But for decades before that, he was very well known in philosophy of mind. But anyway, but the point is that, yeah, I was not on board. I actually found a lot of the things that they said to be sort of a little crude, crass, a lot of low blows, even from people like Richard Dawkins, which was kind of surprising to me. And you know, I knew from experience dealing with the people one on one. I mean, I'd gone to a dinner with Alvin Plantinga, who was invited by Ohio State, not for his work in philosophy of religion, but you know, metaphysics and philosophy of language and epistemology and logic. You know, he's a great philosopher. He's like one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, 21st century now. And, you know, Christians only know him as this, you know, philosopher of religion, but he's better known among philosophers for other things.
Yeah. So you had respect for, well, you had respect for the discipline of philosophy, which you were teaching, which many of the new atheists didn't have respect for. Not only did they not respect theology, they didn't respect philosophy in so many ways. So
I should say something, though. I had respect for the philosophers of religion that I knew of, and that, like, I had taught philosophy of religion a couple of times in like 2004 or so. So I had respect for those guys. Sure, I thought it was possible to be a rational believer, but was not one myself, and I thought there was very little danger of my becoming one too. Theology, well, that's another kettle of fish. I thought, you know, I didn't know much about it, didn't think much about it at all, really. I knew that it existed. Okay, this is an attempt to like systematize the Bible or something. I don't know. But I thought that it was basically an elaborate procedure of rationalism. Sorry, not rationalism, rationalization. Yes. So I didn't actually take that terribly seriously, but that's because I didn't understand what it was all about. And that ultimately is because I didn't understand the Bible.
Right.
So.
Right. And I think you say in your article that your students couldn't really guess where you came from when your philosophy was touching on matters to do with God's existence. A third of the class thought you're a theist, a third thought you're an atheist, a third thought you're an agnostic. And that was sort of a tribute, I guess, to your neutrality in teaching. So that gives you, I guess, some sense of where you're coming from when eventually you do start to think, maybe I should read the Bible. Like, why would that strike you as the next step to take?
Well, it's a little complicated. Like, for years, I felt like I hadn't really gotten a full education, and one of my holes was I never read the Bible all the way through. So there was that. But the previous summer, to make a long story short, a friend of mine told me, sort of tuned me into the whole phenomenon of elite pedophile rings. The idea that people like Jimmy Savile, the Rotherham scandal being covered up for so long. Those are just a couple of British examples. The whole British school system is rife with pedophilia, famously, has been for a long time, right? And then of course, there's the Epstein case, and there's the NXIVM case in the United States. There's the whole Pedowood, which is a whole series of scandals in Hollywood. And I could go on, but the point is, there are a lot of people with a great deal of influence in our society, and all around the world, in fact, who like to rape children. And the evidence of Well, I'm not going to get into it any more than that. Let's just put it at that. And one thing that he tried to persuade me of. He didn't entirely persuade me of this. I even now will argue with him about it because the evidence isn't perfectly clear. But nevertheless, a lot of the people who are involved in that sort of thing are on the record of being New Agers and occultists of one sort or another, Freemasons, etc. At least the people who are accused of it, right? And my friend said, I know these people, and they take it seriously, and it's like part of their sex rights. It's like, what? No, that's... And he said, you need to read these books. And the books that he was referring me to were books about the occult. Not necessarily the occultists' books themselves, but books about the occult. And I couldn't get very far into them because the occultists themselves say that the knowledge, the gnosis, as it's called, is itself powerful and will open up spiritual doorways. And I said, well, if there are any spiritual doorways, I want to keep them shut. Not that I took it terribly seriously that there were, but I thought maybe there's something to it. I mean, these people are undertaking enormous risks. Why would they do that if they didn't believe that it was true? And how could they, being some very bright people, right? You can't deny that the people who are accused of raping children around the world are not bright, because they are. And so they've got to have some reasons, if they actually are into this weird occult stuff, for being into it. Well, I said, well, at least what I can do is come to understand what they're reacting to, because what the occult is, to a very great extent, is a perversion, an inversion of the Bible and biblical symbology, and so forth. So, I put it off, I suppose, for several months. It wasn't really high on my priority list, but one, winter night, I was looking around for something to read at bedtime, and I thought to myself, well, there's the Bible. I could do that. I always wanted to do that, just go all the way through. And so I launched into it.
How long ago was this?
It was December 2019.
Okay.
I was converted in 2020, so I put off announcing it until I was ready to defend my doctrine.
So that's fascinating. There is this awareness of spiritual reality, and that not all of it is light. Possible spiritual reality. Yes.
Right. That's all I admitted at the time.
Yes. And but even the possible dark reality of dark spiritual power was enough to make you think, well, it might be worth checking out if there is a corresponding light that this darkness is a perversion of. And it occurred to you straight away that the Bible was going to be your primary source of information on spiritual truth?
I certainly didn't put it to myself that way. When I started reading the Bible, I thought I was just learning about the Bible. I wasn't like abandoning methodological skepticism or anything. And so I wouldn't have put it to myself that I'm now wanting to learn about spiritual truth and I was going to accept the Bible. No, that was not the idea at all.
It was filling in a blank in terms of your knowledge of the world.
I mean, the motivation was simply I wanted to fill in a gap in my education, first of all, and second of all, I wanted to understand what these occultists were actually reacting to, basically.
That's fascinating, and I wonder whether your reading of the Bible, with that background, you were actually more attuned to the weirder stuff in the Bible that a lot of us who sort of grew up in the faith, we kind of skip over the stuff about supernatural evil and angels and possession and that kind of stuff. And we
I did.
Yeah. Okay.
I tried to understand that on its own terms. Well, I tried to understand everything on its own terms, but yeah.
I love that.
I did.
Yeah. I love you trying to understand, because I've heard you give an interview to Sean McDowell where you talk about the supernatural ability of Sarah to give birth. So, in the Genesis story, here is a woman who's 90 years old, and suddenly she's going to give birth to the promised child, and how is that going to work? And what you said on that interview just fascinated me, because it sounded to me like you were taking the story on its own terms and thinking to yourself, well, narratively, how is this a consistent story? What is the coherence of Sarah at age 90 giving birth to the promised child? Oh, and then drawing the biblical links, the scriptural links back to that. And
shall I set it up for your listeners?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, Abraham and Sarah had been waiting for 30 or 40 years for a child to arrive. Sarah was 90 years old, and she had the pair of them had just received a visit from the Lord God in apparently human form, with two angels also apparently in human form. And he told her, or rather told Abraham, that he was going to become a father. I will return this time next year, and you will have a child. But she was 90 years old, and so she laughed. And actually, that's why Isaac is called Isaac, because it means, laughter. So let's see. There was a famine happening while they were trying to conceive, or perhaps she is already pregnant. It's not clear. And so they throw themselves on the mercy of a local king named Abimelech, looking for food, basically, and a place to water their crops and so forth. Not their crops, but their flocks. And Abimelech takes Sarah as a concubine, essentially. Now, he doesn't consummate the relationship, so to speak, because God warns him first about it.